From the studios of Detroit Public TV, a MiVote special event, the Governor's Town Hall, with Governor Rick Snyder. Good evening, and thanks so much for joining us for MiVote's Town Hall meeting with Governor Rick Snyder. I'm Christy McDonald. Just 2 days after the governor gave his State of the State address, he is here and ready to take your questions on where Michigan is headed. Tonight we have a studio audience, and for the next hour, they'll get a chance to talk to the governor. No sound bites, just real conversation. Also with me tonight to get in on the discussion is Stephen Henderson. He is the editorial page director for the Detroit Free Press, and Nolan Finley. He is the editorial page director for the Detroit News. Governor Snyder, we are so glad that you're here with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
So some critics after the State of the State said that you were a little lean on details. We know that you wanted to start off tonight and address the audience, so go ahead. What would you like to say? Well,
I'm happy to, and it wasn't about being lean on details. It's about reinventing Michigan. That was the mandate I had coming into office, and I'm excited to execute that, which is about more and better jobs and a great place for our children. 2011 was the year to set the foundation for Michigan's future. 2012 is the year to make sure we follow through on what we started and implement good government in Michigan. So it's a different approach, but we're going to keep that same relentless positive action and work in a dog-ears pace to make sure we're giving you the best customer service of any place in the country. And I'm excited for Michigan's future.
You talk a lot about the dashboard and measuring how we're doing as a state. I wanted to ask the audience first off to measure how you think the governor has done so far in office by giving him perhaps a letter grade. So can I see a show of hands who would give the governor an A for what he's done, for the job he's done? Okay, can we see a show of hands for a B? Who gives governor a B? A C? A few hands. D or lower? A few in the audience. What is your reaction to that? Our unscientific poll right here. Very unscientific.
Well, I think that's pretty good. No, I appreciate that because we have a wide cross-section. So part of our great state is democracy. So it's very difficult to have everyone on the same page. But one thing I've really tried to do is to say, let's not focus on our differences. But part of relentless positive action is no blame, no credit. Let's find the common ground. Let's actually appreciate how we're different, but we can solve problems together and really create a new atmosphere on how the public sector should work and be a great role model for the rest of the country.
By the way, Governor, Steve won the over-under on how soon you had mentioned relentless positive action.
He said first 5 words.
Well, as long as we're talking about grades, you gave yourself an incomplete, your speech the other night, when it came to getting the bridge built. It was the only substantive thing on your 2011 agenda that you didn't get done. How are you going to get that bridge started in 2012? Are you prepared to bypass the legislature to do it?
Well, I think we can get the bridge done, but I'm not committing to the exact path because I want to keep working with the legislature. I'm talking to legislators on a regular basis because I believe that's important. But it is important we get the bridge done, and why is that? It's pretty straightforward. It's a great solution for Michigan. It's a jobs question, not a bridge question. It's about long-term jobs, international trade every corner of Michigan, short-term construction jobs. It's a situation because of our partners in Canada paying for our infrastructure costs that would be repaid out of tolls, that we can do it with no Michigan taxpayer money. We can take those Canadian dollars and use them for federal road match to help road projects across Michigan. And ultimately, it's a partnership that would bring in the private sector to build, finance, and run this bridge. So it's a win on all counts. Our biggest problem has been a single special interest that doesn't want to see the bridge built that's spent over $5 million of misleading ads. And that's why I appreciate shows like this, is the more I can talk to our citizens, the more they can see the real facts. We're going to get this bridge done.
That special interest would be Manny Maroon, owner of the Ambassador Bridge. And the public seems to be hung up on this idea of whether the private sector should build a bridge or the state should build a bridge. Do you believe that if the state backed out, Manny Maroon would build a second bridge across the Detroit River?
Well, that's a very complicated question because he has to get a lot of approvals, and he hasn't actually gone through that process. So it's tough to say the answer to that question, Nolan. And to go to your first question, when you say public versus private, there's a partnership with Canada that would be created. But again, that partnership would then go to the private sector to build the bridge, to finance the bridge, and run the bridge. So the way I ultimately look at it is, isn't that free competition? Isn't that the marketplace working? And I'm very much in favor of letting free enterprise work, and to have 2 bridges both being competitive is good for all of us. And I want to see the Ambassador Bridge succeed. I don't want to see them fail. My interest is international trade for Michigan. I'm not in the bridge business. I'm in the international trade business. And so, in fact, while all this discussion's gone on, I can tell you I still have positive discussions with like Homeland Security on how we can help every crossing, including the international bridge, the Ambassador Bridge project.
Let's stick with transportation, which I think is a big theme that you rolled with last year. And the bridge is undone, but we've also got this $1.4 billion shortfall in our road funding that you've said you want to make up. Talk some about how you would want to do that. With the bridge, you say there won't be any Michigan taxpayer dollars going into it. With roads, we do need more taxpayer dollars to make the roads better.
Yeah, we do need to invest more in our roads and bridges in Michigan for the long term. And the studies have shown that number's about $1.4 billion, Stephen, as you know. And so we have a bipartisan package of bills going to the legislature next week, hopefully, that will start that discussion. And one thing I would say is on purpose, I've said that I'm not talking about what that revenue source would be. And the reason I'm doing that is too often if I said something, the political situation would galvanize very quickly, people would take positions, and it might stop the whole thing. Where I want to make sure, let's have a public discussion with our citizens about the $1.4 billion number, period. Because the problem we have in traditional American politics is everyone would say, hey, in 1 year, you're talking about this year, that's a lot of money. But what I'd like people to look at it as, because we're talking about roads and bridges, it's 20 plus years. And so the thing I would say to people when you say, well, it's a lot of money today, well, it would actually save us money. If you went over a 20-year period and we consistently did $1.4 billion and compared it to, say, we didn't invest and we watched our roads drop to 30% good and fair and the rest were just bad roads, all we would be doing is dumping a huge liability on our kids, on our future in 10 years or so. And the cost to put those roads back to fair or good would far exceed the cost of what we're paying today, even if you present valued those dollars. So it would actually save us money to be smart today and not let things go into disrepair later. Well,
since the State of the State, people have started talking in these last 2 days about, are you going to raise the car registration fee? Have you had any feedback from people about that? If they're willing to do that, to pay more?
Yeah, well, that's exactly the point is I don't want to drop in and say it's registration fee or fuel tax right away. I want to get the discussion on the 1.4 out there so we can have a good dialogue. And as people give us feedback and we get thoughts from citizens on the best way to do that, then I'm happy to take some leadership and say, now based on listening to our citizens and our legislators, here's what we believe is the best answer. Now let's move forward with that.
All right, so let's go to our citizens. We have our studio audience here. We have a first question for the governor. Go ahead.
It's great to see you, Governor Snyder. Michelle Hodges, Troy Chamber of Commerce. You do deserve some credit, and that is for your support of the Troy Transit Center. Certainly that was fantastic and helped us move that forward. Now that we've got this positive momentum, how can we direct that towards getting regional transit in place? We'd appreciate your coaching on that. We want to be part of your team, and we want to rock and make it happen. So help us.
Well, that's great. That's the fire and passion I like. Because regional transit's a question that's been out there about 40 years without a good solution. And the traditional solution everyone tried was to say, okay, let's take SMART and MDOT and put them together. We've seen that's failed multiple times every time that comes up. So I thought a new approach was appropriate. And that was to create a new regional transit authority for southeastern Michigan. And not just me deciding this. What we've done is we've partnered with the city of Detroit, the 4 surrounding counties, and the U.S. Department of Transportation as a team to say we're putting a proposal together that would create a bus rapid transit system along the main corridors, Gratiot, Woodward, Michigan Avenue, M59, and connect those in some fashion with an authority that would look to raise revenue potentially through a local option of a registration fee or some way to raise money to pay for it. And that would serve as a new backbone of a regional system that would be great. And to go with that then we could have a dialogue with SMART and DDOT about how to coordinate schedules, how to work together, and longer term potentially look at how to integrate things. And it would also tie in M1 nicely because they're reworking their proposal to go from the riverfront to Grand Boulevard. And I think that could be an exciting proposal. I appreciate their hard work and the private sector stepping up. So it'd be great then because we would have a strategic framework for the long term through this regional transit authority. And where we are right now is we've had great meetings with all those local players. I believe we have good alignment. And this package of bills going in soon on a bipartisan fashion will include the Regional Transit Authority. So I encourage you to talk to your state legislators to tell them to get on board with this, because this is a chance for the region to work together in teamwork.
Well, Governor, would you really start a third transportation authority in this region without first killing SMART and DDOT? And if you did, where would the money to run that third system come? Wouldn't it make better sense to get rid of the dysfunctional systems and start over from scratch?
Again, Nolan, to just get rid of them would be too difficult, because people are relying on these for their jobs and for getting around and for school. What I would say, though, is that's why it's failed so many times. When I got into this, I couldn't imagine the history. I literally have people that have been working on this topic for 40 years. They came to me and said, did you realize this is attempt 24? And my point is don't take the same old question the same old way. Add a new question and say, let's show success with this new regional system. So this bus rapid transit system would have great value. And the authority that would be there would be able to raise revenue, but it would only happen with a vote of the people in that entire jurisdiction. So what we've done is we've already talked about a governance structure with these communities. And to be open with you, when we got feedback on that, people were saying, well, you guys have done this in 3 or 4 meetings. In the old days, this used to take us 2 years to even get to the point of deciding on governance, where we were able to get that discussion to a point where we can go to the legislature in just a month or 2. It's a whole new attitude and an approach. And that creates the framework to then say, let's take these other legacy questions you're talking about and figure them out in that context of success, not failure.
Okay, let's move forward and talk a little bit about jobs, business, the economy in the state of Michigan. Obviously, a big thing is
like talking about that.
I know you like talking about. Everyone
good.
likes jobs. I want to hear more about that. Obviously, a big victory for you is getting rid of the Michigan business tax. How do we now get beyond the perception that it's tough to do business in Michigan? And how hard is that going to be over the next year?
Well, that was the centerpiece in many respects, and it wasn't about me. This was something that actually drove Michigan people out of Michigan. The Michigan business tax was the dumbest tax in the United States, in my view. And when I was running for office, it was interesting. A lot of people have talked about the MBT, and they would say, cut the surcharge, cut this, cut it in half. And my view was, if you have something dumb and divided by 2, it's still dumb.
That's quite a math equation that I'm sure kids everywhere can relate to.
So you had something that was dumb that was a job killer, because essentially it was a double tax on our small and medium-sized business people. And this is something most people don't realize, is our business people on flow-through entities pay the individual income tax just like you and I on our salaries and wages. So when people talk about us giving a huge cut by getting rid of the MBT, that's not really true. What we did was get rid of a second tax we were asking them to pay that none of the rest of us were paying. And the weird part is it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it, to say the people that create the jobs, we want to put more tax burden on them. That's backward. So we got rid of this double tax burden. And that really creates an environment to say business is welcome to Michigan. So there are a lot of other things we're doing. We've done unemployment insurance reform, workers' comp reform, a lot of regulatory reform. We're going through a systematic thing. But the centerpiece was to make the Michigan business tax go away.
Well, speaking of taxes, you've also raised the issue of the personal property tax. And there's a part of that I know that you think is also a really dumb tax. You've said that before. But that's a tax that local jurisdictions rely on a lot for revenue. And if you get rid of it, they're going to be even shorter than they are now. How do you address those problems for cities and townships if you're going to make the climate better for business?
Stephen, that's a very good question. And the challenge, in some ways, with the personal property tax, it's complicated. It's much more complicated discussion. And it needs to be a much more longer, more thoughtful discussion with the local jurisdictions being part of the solution, not the state telling them what to do. And I think that's critically important, and that's the way I'm approaching it. Because if you ask them, they'll tell you they don't like the industrial part of the personal property tax. They would like to get rid of it, but they don't know what to do. So it's a common dialogue to say, here's a tax that, again, is hurting business job creators and job creation, that can't we partner with them to work it out where they come up with solutions that the state can support in partnership, where basically we don't harm their revenue stream. We create an environment where basically they can be successful for the long term, we can be successful, these companies can succeed and hire more people. And so that's the solution I want. So I'm not going to prematurely get behind any piece of this until it's clear that people are working together in a collaborative fashion.
All right, let's go ahead, and we're going to get a bunch of questions now from the audience. Go ahead, sir. You've got a question for the governor.
Good evening, Governor.
Hi.
Guy Williams. I'm with Detroiters working for environmental justice. And on the jobs topic, major projects such as the International Crossing, if it's to come forward, would provide a lot of employment opportunity in Southwest Detroit. And right now there are regulations on the books that require local hiring, and we're aware that that's not being enforced as stringently as it could be. I'd really like to know what you might do to buttress those efforts to get more local employment around the big projects, and what you feel about Representative Tlaib's bill on the international crossing and community benefits agreements.
Yeah, well, good question, because part of any project like that should include community benefits. And they need to be done in a thoughtful way. And I can tell you, we've already done a fair amount of analysis on that question. What I'd say is, in terms of specific legislation on it, I don't know if that's really required versus making sure we make good, solid commitments to do that. And I've already said that in many respects, if we were to do this project move ahead, we would be using a project like the Blue Water Bridge that had a good, strong community benefits package kind of as a guide. And my goal is, I would hope we could do even better than that, but to say, here's a project that has a history that people can look at, that had good things going on. Let's do at least that well. And then the better thing is, instead of legislating what people do, let's work with real people in the community to say, how do we make that happen? Because it would be a fabulous project for Delray, the surrounding communities. Because right now, the quality of life isn't great in terms of the truck traffic and everything else going on. And it would be a much better, you talk about environmental justice, the amount of asthma in that area is way too high. And we could do much to improve, I would hope, by building this crossing.
Thank you very much.
Well, Governor, you talked the other night in your speech about the number of jobs that have been created in Michigan in 2011. We are in the midst of a stronger automotive recovery than we've seen in a long time. When you take a look at what's going on in Michigan, how much credit can you give to your policies, and how much are you just simply benefiting from this automotive bounce? And how soon do you think we'll be in a position in Michigan when we're no longer so dependent on the cycles of that industry?
Yeah, well, you asked a couple of questions there, Nolan. On the first one, on the credit question, I don't care. That's not why I wanted this job. This isn't about Rick Snyder ever being governor. This is about Michigan being a great state again. So as part of Relentless Positive Action, I've said it many times, I'm not interested in credit. It's about us succeeding together. And the good part is we are showing very positive progress. And part of that positive feedback that's happening right now is the auto industry. And the exciting part is, from the way I view it, and a lot of us have been around quite a while. We've been to a movie before many times with the auto industry that typically would say it's boom or bust. And we're on the upward cycle, but the positive part that gets me excited is I think the industry is doing a much better job this time of not going too far on the boom side so the bust happens. And that's really important for us for the long term, is to have them be stable and sustainable and growing on a long-term basis, and they're doing a really nice job. So I don't want to walk away from the auto industry at all. I think, why should we do that when they're part of our legacy heritage? They got their act together and they're doing really well and they've learned some good lessons that are important. What I would say, though, is we need to supplement that by having other industries do well. And when they do well in manufacturing, that helps all manufacturing in Michigan in terms of diversifying. We should be looking at aerospace, medical device. But one industry I love to talk about, too, that gets overlooked. When we had the tough 2000 to 2010 period, all those tough years, we had a shining star that we didn't give credit to, and that was our agricultural industry. They were doing great. They continue to do great. And how often do we say thank you to them for their great work? And if you look at the future, the amount of food needing to be exported, we're the second most diverse state in the nation for agriculture. We got a great opportunity, and I'll share one quick story with the folks here that I did a trade mission to China and to Asia. And I'm sitting next to an Asian business person at this meeting, and I said, I'm bragging about Michigan. I said, we're the second most diverse agricultural state in the nation. And he looks at me and he goes, blueberries. I said, okay, blueberries. What about blueberries? He goes, we love them. We buy and eat every blueberry you make. And he didn't know this. I said, by the way, did you know the #1 state in the nation for blueberries is Michigan? So I came back and said, let's get some blueberries going here, folks.
They've got a great blueberry festival in mid-Michigan every year. They sure do. All right, I'm going to try to get in a little bit more, a couple more questions from the audience. Go ahead, sir. Hi.
Good evening, Governor. My question has to do with your customer service theme that you brought up this evening and also at the State of the State. If you have a company that provides a good or service and they realize that they had overcharged their customer, that company if it's a good company, will refund that money to the customers. Now, where I'm going at this question is, last month, the SFA released a report. The budgets from last year going out to 2013, you're looking at over a $1 billion surplus. So my question to you is, everyone in Lansing is talking about investment, 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 including yourself. My question is, why is there no talk of returning the money to the people that actually produce that surplus, the taxpayers?
No, I appreciate that question. And when you said SFA, I don't know if everyone realizes that's the Senate Fiscal Agency in terms of their forecast. When you really look at the numbers, the surplus available is $400 and some million, which is still very significant. But a couple things I would mention to you is, when you talk about giving the money back, we actually did major tax reforms that made some reductions. But the part that also stands out is we owe a lot in liabilities. So the way I view it is, I talk about investing smartly and saving smartly. And we do need to look at that. That last year we cut $1.5 billion from the deficit. But we started making some payments on some long-term liabilities that if we consistently make those payments in retirement and such, we can reduce our liabilities by over $4 billion. The other thing is we made a deposit to the Michigan Rainy Day Fund. We put $255 million in the Michigan Rainy Day Fund. The Rainy Day Fund had $2 million in it. It had been run down to virtually nothing. So I agree with you as we get to the circumstance, but I also want to make sure we're taking care of our essentially credit card debt, our mortgage, everything else in a thoughtful fashion. So all those things need to be looked at. I always think about the issue is, if we could give that money back, we should look at it, because it's not taking money for spending money. And that was the old government philosophy that I don't like. And that's what I've tried to make clear is, with this surplus, it shouldn't be about spending money. It's about making smart investments, using dollars thoughtfully where we can show you a real return on investment. We should never take a dollar if we can't show it was a good shopping choice for you, our citizens.
Christy, can
Governor,
I follow up
okay, go ahead.
on that just real quick on the surplus? You're going to have every interest group, every advocacy group trying to get a piece of that money. You're also going to have a legislature they're running for election. They've got to give something to the folks back home. Every one of their school districts, every one of their communities have been hurting, have had to cut back service. How are you going to keep their hands off that money?
That's part of the cultural change I'm pushing in Lansing from the day I arrived. When I first showed up in Lansing and I'd walk into a meeting, after people would say hello, and you're usually nice to the governor to start with when they walk in a meeting.
In the beginning, right?
In the beginning. And they say hi, the next words out of their mouth is, we need money or we want money. That started from the day I took office. It's nothing new. But I'd look at them and I would say, so what? Because the line I wanted to use that came to me later is I wanted to look at them and say, what do I look like, an ATM? It's not about spending money. It's about showing you real results to real people, and with accountability and transparency. Because it's basically, we're another shopping choice for you, our citizens. You can use the money for private things, you can use them for public things. And for us to say we should be spending money, we need to show you, for all your shopping choices, this was a worthwhile discussion because it makes a difference. And that would go back to transportation. That would go to education. I would like to invest more in education, but what I'll tell you is, for like K through 12, I think it's important we ask, where is the student growth coming? Because we've been spending lots of money for lots of years, and when you say we're 17% college ready, that's unacceptable. Because we didn't have enough measures and metrics to say, let's show some real results.
Critics could say, though, and we're moving on to our next topic of education, critics could say, though, but you can't get 100% college readiness if you keep cutting funding from schools. I think maybe a lot of parents at home say, there's a surplus. Will our schools get cut again this year round, or will some money come back to the school system? What are your plans for this year?
Yeah, the first thing is we're using college ready because that's a metric we have, but the right metric should be college or career ready. Because we want to make sure we need skilled tradespeople. We got a lot of other good professions out there, so it shouldn't be everything's college-based, but that's the metric. So that's why I use that term. But the second piece of that is, and I was clear even last year with our planning year budget to say we hope not to cut again. So I set that benchmark already. I hope to have incremental dollars to invest. But what I'd say is it's not just going to be giving people a check. It's saying, okay, can you show us something? Because I'll ask the audience here, if I just simply stood up here and looked at anyone here and said, give me 20 bucks. How many people are going to say, sure, here's $20? Or what would you normally say if someone in your family or anyone you know just walked up and said, give me 20 bucks? You're going to say, right.
What do you need it
So,
for?
but think about that with government, until I started making this big point, this big discussion that I'm having now, in prior years, people would just walk up to government and say, give me 20 bucks, and they would give them 20 bucks. Now I'm an accountant, so you got a boring governor that's an accountant now saying, well, I'm happy to talk about giving you 20 bucks, but tell me what you're going to do with it so I can make sure that I can share with the public how it's going to make a difference in your lives that means something.
The other big push you had on education last year was with changing accountability, both with teachers. You changed the tenure laws, and you would like to devise a new way of holding schools themselves accountable. We haven't seen a lot of progress yet on devising the systems to do that, though, and I'm wondering how you make those fair and how you make them enforceable. In other words, how do you make sure they are making schools better and not just punishing people, teachers or schools themselves?
Yeah, well, it comes down to measuring student growth. Student growth is the key metric, and when I say that, it's not comparing one district against the other or student against one another. It's saying a student was here at this point in time, a year has passed, have they grown a year, right? Because that's a fair way to measure it. And the way I view it is that it shouldn't just be, in the long term, Stephen, I'm just sharing my thoughts. I'm not the education expert. Right. We have good people. But it shouldn't just be standardized tests. In a perfect world, my view is a student should travel with a portfolio of their work.
Right.
That has these standardized tests, but has papers, reports, because ultimately when they want a job as a potential employer, I'd love to open that up to say, show me a paper you wrote. Show me something interesting that you wrote so I can see, are you a good writer? Can you explain things? I mean, those skills. So we need to get to that because I'm very much pro-teacher. Because the teachers are one of the key elements. Parents and teachers educate our kids. So one of the things on the teacher thing was teacher tenure reform, which I think is a positive improvement. And again, if you look at their strong national support, we're actually a follower on a number of these things, as opposed to a leader. We're following that, but one of the exciting parts of the teacher changes was creating a master teacher category, which we still need to figure out how to best to look to implement, which is the concept of our very best teachers quite often feel compelled to go be an administrator or principal because they see that's their career path. And I think there's a better way to say, can't we keep you in the classroom so you're still teaching, but you could mentor other teachers and we could actually compensate you for that extra work. That's a great solution.
So how soon do you think we'll see some of this stuff start to develop? I know this is very difficult and it won't happen overnight, but it's been, I don't know, 8 or 10 months.
Well, it's all in process. We have the evaluation team going. The superintendent of schools, Mike Flanagan's doing a nice job. We're partnering pretty well with the Board of Education on all this. Again, a lot of good things are going on. And I'll share one other interesting story for you about one thing we still need to do is there's something on cyber learning and dual enrollment. And the dual enrollment one, I like to use as an illustration of a way to help bring down our college costs because college is too expensive today. And the illustration I'll give you is back when I was a kid, I was a good nerd. You all know that pretty much. That's not a surprise to anybody. But I actually completed 12 college classes before my scheduled time to graduate from high school. 12 classes. How much credit do you think I got in my high school for those 12 college classes? I got credit for one of those 12 classes. And it was interesting. Actually, I had to take U.S. government in high school. It was required by statute back in those days in your senior year. Well, in my junior year, I'd completed a community college class where I got an A in government, and I still had to take government in high school. That was dumb. And what I would say is, think about that for kids that have, again, the opportunity to take some of those early classes and could get credit in both. That theoretically you could save a half a year or potentially a whole year. And how much money is that worth in terms of a whole year of college education, room and board, all those costs? So that's something that I hope gets through the legislature fairly quickly.
All right, we're going to talk about higher ed in a minute, but let's go ahead and get to the audience. Hi, ma'am.
Hi, thank you, Governor, for having this. My name is Kathy. I'm going back to the economic and jobs creation. My question is on personal property tax, and eliminating any part of the personal property tax will mean a job loss of employment in many local communities. Is there a plan to tie any of the cuts in personal property tax to job creation in those communities?
Yeah, I'm not sure I follow you on how you get job loss from cutting the personal property tax.
My example is I work at the Howell Carnegie District Library. It would mean a huge cut for us. Our only alternative after all the losses we've had in property tax collection in the last 3 years is to start cutting hours and cutting people.
Yeah, to make it clear that all the reforms we're talking about, though, would involve the state putting a replacement revenue stream in to hopefully largely compensate the local jurisdictions. So that wouldn't involve cuts. It would basically say the state, instead of that industrial company, would be providing revenue to the local jurisdiction. So it wouldn't require you to cut back. I mean, that's part of the solution we're looking to put in place. So it's actually not to put hardships on communities that are already struggling. It's literally to say, by removing that tax burden, that employer will hire more people, and that community will be more appealing for other manufacturers and other people to make investments in that community, which would create more tax base, which would create more opportunity for both private and public sector employment.
If it works that way, that'd be great.
That's the goal.
Okay. Thank you. And we're also going to be looking for some education questions. So if you've got them, go ahead and raise your hand. Let's talk a little bit about higher education. We were talking about this earlier, about the debt burden that many of our students have coming out of Michigan universities because they are paying so much more in tuition compared to their other friends across the country. Is there anything in the budget coming up that we can look forward to in terms of giving out help to the Michigan universities?
Yeah, that's one of the areas I'd like to look at is, can we start putting dollars back towards higher education? Again, with the concept of how can they show performance results to go with that.
And what are the performance results that you're looking for from higher ed? I mean, what are the things that they need to do to get that money?
Yeah, well, we'll come to that in the budget presentation. We're actually coming up with some good criteria, and we've asked some expertise, and we've actually solicited input from the universities.
Are they efficiency related, or are they
one of the easy ones is could be graduation related.
Okay.
It could be one of the features to say how many graduates are you actually coming, because we actually have a lot of people going into college that never finish.
That don't finish, right?
And so one of the things is to encourage full completion of that process, to say how can we ask institutions to work a little bit harder on making sure that people get their degree.
All right, let's go ahead. Hang on, Nolan. Let's go ahead and go to the audience to make sure we get as many questions as possible.
I bet this is a higher ed question.
It could be. It could be.
Could be.
It could be.
Thank
No
you,
plans
Governor.
here, but it could be.
Thank you, Governor, for doing today's town hall meeting. I'm Dan Little. I'm Chancellor at University of Michigan Dearborn. One of the things many of us were excited about at the beginning of your term is the fact that you come from a technology-centered industry. You recognize the economic impact that the STEM field, science, technology, engineering, and math, can have. Historically, state of Michigan has had a great concentration of very well-educated, from bachelor's to master's to PhD students and graduates, and that's a huge economic asset. So what I would like to ask you is, at that level of advanced training in science, technology, engineering, and math, what are some of your plans for how we can really keep that advantage and push it even further in the coming years?
Yeah, well, part of it is funding for higher education, Dan, and you got a great institution. I mean, you do a great job there, so I appreciate that. So we want to support that. The other piece is what do we do to keep these young people here? That when you talk about the advanced degrees, this is something that we need to communicate with people so they can get all the facts. But one of the proposals I'm going to work on is immigration. That's the one of the few federal issues I'm going to address this next year, is going to Washington to say in a very narrow fashion. So don't think about all the big immigration questions, because that hasn't gone anywhere for a real long time. But I think there's a lot of merit to saying, let's look at a way to allow immigration for people with advanced degrees, particularly in engineering, science, and math, or they're entrepreneurs with capital to invest. Because we have these students already, we're educating them, and then we tell them to get out. And there's a lot of evidence. The question people always have, well, are you taking a job away from a Michigander when you do that? And the evidence is fairly compelling. The answer is no. These are job generators. They create jobs by what they do. And the greatest illustration is, look at Silicon Valley. Probably known as the entrepreneurial center of the world still. It used to be in Detroit, we were the entrepreneurial center, and we're going to get back here. But Silicon Valley holds that title today, and one of the reasons they do that is a huge percentage of the companies they create have foreign nationals, these very people creating these companies. And so the good part is we've communicated enough that I've able to get the support from the Michigan universities, the Teamsters, the Regional Council of Carpenters and Millwrights, the operating engineers unions are all supportive of this proposal, because we've laid it out for them clearly enough to say these are going to generate jobs that will help employ engineers, carpenters, other people like that. So that's something I would appreciate broader support to get everyone on board to say, let's welcome people to Michigan, because the last thing I'll leave with on this immigration point is we tend to forget that's how we build our country. Is most of us are immigrants or kids of immigrants, and we have a few companies around our state like Dow, like Meyer, like Masco, that were all founded by immigrants. So they may be Michigan companies today, but they were founded by an immigrant. Let's
head to the audience. Go ahead. Hi, ma'am.
Well, it seems the conversation has moved a little quicker than the line. My question goes back to the economy. In the state of the state, you mentioned attracting people to the state of Michigan, businesses and entrepreneurs, but what about helping people become entrepreneurs in Michigan? So not that you are already an entrepreneur, but you can come to Michigan and become an entrepreneur. Like there's an organization in Detroit called Townhall, and they offer, what you're familiar with it, they offer a program that helps people with training and mentorship and helping them find funding to start their own businesses, but to use that as a way to not only attract people to the state of Michigan, but to retain the students who come here to go to college or who are already from here.
Well, you actually hit it right on the head. That's a bigger priority to me than bringing people into state. A higher priority to me is economic gardening, which are helping Michiganders right here in Michigan. And that needs to be a higher priority than attraction to Michigan. If you think about it, think about any business you know of. And if you have a challenged business model, do you take care of your current customers first, or do you go after new customers? You always take care of your current customers first before you worry about new customers. Same thing's true in this case. We should be taking care of Michiganders first, and we are. I'm putting that a higher priority. That was part of the idea of wiping out all those incentives. We used to buy people to come into Michigan, largely with huge packages. We've dramatically reduced that because I want to focus on making sure I can tell you as a Michigander, you're getting a fair deal, and we're giving you the best thing possible. And when you talk about entrepreneurship, I really appreciate that because Techtown is doing some really good work. In fact, I'm proud of my record. A lot of people don't know, before I became governor, I was actually one of the founders of Ann Arbor Spark, which was a group that's done very well at helping Michiganders create and grow companies. And what I would say is we have Techtown, we have Ann Arbor Spark, we have Automation Alley in this area. We've got some great groups, but what we're doing is looking at Southwest Michigan first, the right place, other parts of the state, and finding the very best work being done in one corner of the state and then spreading it to the other parts. So I'm really excited about really taking entrepreneurship and innovation on helping people create companies and get it to every corner of Michigan by having a share instead of compete.
I think we're going to move along a little bit and talk as we're starting to wrap towards a close, talk about the emergency manager law, Detroit, and an urban agenda right now. Did you want to start?
Yeah, sure. At the State of the State, you introduced Mayor Bing to a rousing standing ovation. But earlier in the week at a panel, he talked about how you're talking about helping cities, but that he doesn't see a lot of action. He called it lip service. Talk about the sort of tension between those two positions.
Well, again, whatever remarks Mayor Bing, I appreciate it. He's in a difficult spot, but I think we've been working well, and a lot of it is clearly in the background, because my goal is not to get attention for what we're doing, but to help our communities. So when you talk about the urban agenda and doing pieces, I haven't announced a broad strategy, but we're doing a lot of good work, and I'll give you some illustrations. Public safety. When kids came back to school in Detroit, we were collaborating. Actually, I had the Michigan State Police join in with the Detroit Police, the Detroit Public Schools, where the Michigan State Police helicopter was helping make sure kids were getting safely to class. We have a project going on in Flint right now, where we made a major commitment to help public safety in Flint. Transit. We're clearly taking leadership on a regional transit authority about bringing things together to make sure people can get to work in urban areas. Lighting. Just yesterday, there was an announcement about the state of Michigan, the city of Detroit, Detroit DTE, and the federal government collaborating on a major award to Detroit to do LED lighting on a number of major streets. Education. We're working hard with the Educational Achievement Authority to deal with failing schools. So if you add these up, we are not bragging about them. We're just trying to do our job in the background to support these cities in success.
Well, Governor, you've been hearing for 6 months from Detroit that they're close to getting an agreement on concessions. They're close to presenting you a plan. You're now marching up against a deadline, no plan. How confident are you that Detroit can avoid an emergency manager, and can it fix its problems without one at this point?
Well, I certainly hope so, Nolan, because I mean, my goal isn't to make speculation on it, it's to be supportive. I want them to solve their own problem. I don't want to appoint an emergency manager. As a practical matter, we have a review team going now that has strong Detroit ties that doing their work independently. I don't have any real communication with them. I'm not trying to influence them. They're going through that analytical analysis of what are the facts, working with the city, and hopefully doing good work to say there's no crisis, there's a consent agreement, or there is a need for an emergency manager. And I'm letting them do their work. And I want to see Detroit succeed. So we're just going to continue to hold out the olive branch to say, hey, I'm there to be a partner. When people criticize me, say I'm giving lip service, I'm a tough enough guy, I'm a tough nerd. I just let that roll off because I'm going to keep that olive branch out in front of every community, every city to say, as governor of Michigan, my role is to support our citizens and our communities as the best partner possible.
But there does come a decision point. I mean, are you prepared if what you hear from this review committee doesn't match your expectations, are you prepared to appoint a manager?
Well, I'm going to do my job. I think everyone recognizes that. I'll do what I need to do to represent all the citizens of Michigan, including the citizens of any of those communities, because they're my citizens too. They helped elect me, and I take that responsibility very seriously.
Let's go ahead and go to the audience. Hi.
Hi, I'm sorry to go backwards a little bit, but everything's about the economy for us that are stuck in it. And congratulations, by the way, for all the things that you have gotten accomplished. It can't be easy. And it takes a lot of courage to really face these major issues that are out there. So we appreciate that. My point is this, I'm a small businessman in Michigan. Thanks for the Michigan business tax going away. That helps a little bit. But I think the important thing that we want to know as small business owners is 70% of the new hires will come from new businesses, new industries. What is your administration doing to help the small businesses that exist and grow? And to the other lady's articulate point is become the new entrepreneurs and stimulate the growth in Michigan.
No, that's a great question, because the more we can spread the message about the good things we already have going, the better. And we've got some great programs already going. So I encourage you to go to your local economic development people or the MEDC. We actually have some good capital programs and loan programs to say the financing environment is difficult today, and there are some unique programs we came up with that isn't about just giving you money, but potentially loaning you money to help bridge that gap so you can work with private institutions and banks to do that. One program I really like, though, that's a subset of is called Pure Michigan Business Connect. Here's a novel idea that we thought we could just get people to work better together. So we went out and asked companies to sign up and participate, and they agreed to. It's not about the state spending money. It's about asking Michiganders to do business with other Michiganders. And it's worked really well. And a couple of our leadoff partners were DTE and Consumers Energy. They both signed up to do significant dollars a year, $50 million per year for the next 5 years of additional buying from Michigan people. That's a lot of money. And that's a chance to work with small businesses, and they're seeing great success. We've had other people sign up. So I encourage you to go to the MEDC website, to Pure Michigan Business Connect, and sign up to be a company that wants to buy more Michigan or wants to have more Michigan companies buy from you. Because what a great role for government. We can be a convener, not a spender, and get people to work better together. That's exciting.
Earlier this week, Governor, there was a protest at your neighborhood about the emergency manager law. What would you say to those people who were there? How would you convince them that the law as it is right now should stand?
Yeah, first of all, I respect democracy. To be open with you, I'm a fair target, but when you get to the point of essentially attacking my wife and my child, that's somewhat borderline in terms of how people should handle those situations. But I respect people's right to demonstrate, and they can call me anything they want. But as a practical matter, a lot of it is getting people the facts on how the system actually works. Because it's not about taking anything over. The law, we've had an emergency manager law in Michigan going back to Governor Blanchard. We had 6 jurisdictions in financial receivership or schools when I took office. We had one new one last year. We are likely to get a handful more this year. And the real question, what we did with the law, was put in an early warning system to say, there was no early warning system before, but to put in a system to say we can work with communities with reviews, advice, consulting to help them ever avoid an emergency manager. And I thought that was a very prudent and smart thing to do. The second thing we did is we put more powers with the emergency manager with some safeguards. If you actually look at the statute, when people say they can just go change union contracts, that's not true. There's a whole list of specific criteria that have to be met before they can take action. And the idea there was, instead of having an emergency manager, which in some cases under the old law could go on for years and years, let's empower them so they can get in, do their job, and get out, so the communities can run their communities. So in many respects, it's not a subjective thing. As you heard us talk about Detroit and the review team, it's not me all of a sudden saying there's an emergency manager or not. There is a review team that has in statute a whole list of criteria to say, these are the rules, are they meeting these or not? And that review team has strong Detroit ties. They're very prominent. It was a well-regarded group of people that is making their own objective assessment of the situation. So in a lot of ways, I hope people step back for a minute instead of just hearing what you hear in the sound bites and look and say, these are tough cases, and what we did was put in a very thoughtful, objective process to say, how do we help people succeed? And if there is a true failure, how do we resolve that failure as quickly as possible so we can let good government get back in place and build for the future? Because that's the last thing I would add. This whole thing with emergency situations is we spend too much time talking about the crisis, because the crisis isn't to end at the bottom. We should spend much more time talking about growing the city and building these communities back in a good, positive way. And I want to emphasize that, and we can do a much better job working together to talk about a great Detroit, a great Flint.
Okay, ma'am, go ahead. You have a question for the governor.
My name is Jackie Johnston, and we actually have something in common, Governor. I am also an accountant. I'm from Coopers and Lybrand. However, in my current life, I am superintendent of Huron Valley Schools, and I'm concerned about school district funding. With the passage of Proposal A back in 1995, the state took over funding of school districts. We receive our funding on a per pupil basis, and that funding is inequitable on a per pupil basis. So Huron Valley Schools is funded 24th out of 28 in Oakland County. We're below the state average. And for the last 16 years since Proposal A went into effect, we've heard Lansing talk about wanting to do something to ensure that all Michigan students receive the same funding level from the state. For 16 years we've heard that. So now my question for you is, now that there has been money identified in the general fund and in the school aid fund, largely because of the cuts that the school districts experienced this year, will you commit to putting money back into schools to bring equity to all Michigan school children and to provide funding for all school districts to help us address those inflationary costs such as fuel for buses, utilities, and the cost of benefits?
Yeah, what I would say is Proposal A is showing its age in a lot of ways. It was a huge reform, and it actually did a lot of good things for a long time, but as a practical matter, it's getting pretty long in the tooth. And that is a fair topic for further discussion. What I'd say is that's not on my agenda for 2012. But as we listen to people and you hear issues, that would be something that could be worthwhile for future years in terms of looking at that whole structure. What I would say is we've had well-established formulas for some time on education, and we had to make a 2% cut this last year. What I want to do is invest more dollars in education this next year, but again, on best practice to show that there are real results, there is student growth, and look at that. And look at those questions, because I think that is important in terms of educating our kids. So we just need to continue the dialogue on this, because there are very strong feelings on education. There should be. We're talking about one of our most precious assets, our young people.
All right, in the last couple minutes that we have, we're going to do maybe a couple rapid-fire questions at you, Governor. Go ahead, Nolan.
Well, you told the business community you don't want right to work on your desk this morning. How do you keep it off your desk?
Well, that's a pretty good signal.
Does that mean you won't sign it, though? That's the question, right? I mean, that implies a threat that you might not sign the legislation if they passed it. You haven't really done that a whole lot with some things, other things that you said you didn't want to see.
Well, I won't technically even read into that, but I said I don't really want to see it on my desk. It's not on my agenda because there are far too more important things that we can agree on to get done because we don't want to be Ohio or Wisconsin.
Michigan healthcare exchanges, how do you get people to understand that there is movement that's needed to comply with the Affordable Care Act? How are you going to convince the legislature to get on board this year?
Well, that's where I am sending the message. It's a huge project to even do something like that. And the starting point is what we're talking about is not a federal healthcare exchange. If we don't act, we're liable to get a federal healthcare exchange, which I don't think a lot of people like compared to Michiganders coming up with their own model. And how many people don't like Travelocity or Orbitz? How many people still buy your airplane tickets by calling 5 airlines? And that's the kind of message I'm trying to get across to people is why don't we do something simple like that that would be an exchange that works for Michiganders to give you better shopping choices, hopefully with more competition at a lower cost. I think that's a good project, but it takes some months to do. So I encourage you to talk to your legislators to say, we can't wait too long, folks, because there's a clock ticking that if we don't act, you're going to have a federal exchange whether you like it or not, short of what happens in the Supreme Court or other places.
Advice to Mitt Romney, who's a fellow Michigander and also a fellow venture capitalist.
Recognize that Michigan's the best state in the country, and if he becomes president, there's a great place to use as a role model for success.
Are you going to, now wait a minute, are you going to get into the fray of the Republican primary? Are you going to endorse a candidate?
I haven't been clear about that. I've basically said I'm not even going to take a position until 30 days before the primary, and people wonder why. Obviously, I have personal feelings, but you hired me to be governor of Michigan. And the way I view it is for me to mess around on federal issues and all this other stuff distracts from me doing my job. And I hope you appreciate the fact that most politicians don't do that. I'm not a career politician. And my goal is to say, you hired me to do a job in Michigan. I'm going to stay focused on that. On immigration, I view it as helping Michigan, a few other selective cases, but largely when people ask me federal questions, I won't give them an answer because that's not what I was hired to do.
But you got a pretty good deal now in Michigan with an all-Republican legislature. What are you going to do to make sure you hold the House this fall?
Well, I think it's important that we have a continuation of what we have. So I look forward, because a lot of these legislators, Republican legislators, ran on the same philosophy of reinventing Michigan. And we did town halls, we did events together that were really rewarding. So I look forward for the opportunity to crisscross Michigan talking about good things that we've done, that we're going to do for any candidate that really is embracing reinventing Michigan.
But you've said before that you like to approach things from a bipartisan basis. Give us an example of where that's happened in the last year. I mean, Democrats in the state would say it's not very bipartisan, that they're locked out. Tell us why that's not true.
Yeah, one great illustration would be the Regional Transit Authority. If you look at it, we've got county execs from multiple parties. We've got a Democratic mayor. We've got a Democratic federal administration. We've partnered well on those things.
All right, well, we're going to have to leave it there. I see Nolan just went, oh, he's got another 5, 10 questions, but we're going to have to stop you right there. Governor, we so appreciate your time, and we know that you wanted to say something to the audience in the last few minutes.
Great.
Go right ahead.
No, I really appreciate it. We're at a unique time in Michigan's history. This is about reinventing Michigan. You hired me with a mandate to say fixing Michigan was not good enough. So it's time to be bold and to set high expectations and to make things happen. 2011 was the year of showing results in terms of setting a new foundation. 2012 is the year to implement these things, to show that we're going to follow through. It's not about adding more, but doing things really well and showing you good customer service government. The most important thing we can do, though, is to reinvent our culture. We've been too negative, looking at the old world, instead of saying there's a bright future out there. So let's get on board with relentless positive action. That's my philosophy. No blame, no credit, but coming together as Michiganders to say, here is common ground. Here's where we agree. Let's move forward in a relentless fashion. Let's take care of our kids that way, show them a bright future, and show the rest of the country and the world that Michigan's back and we're a great state again. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Governor Snyder, for joining me. Nolan Finley, Stephen Henderson, it's always very interesting. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being here. And we want to thank our studio audience for being here. How about we give the governor a hand for taking these questions? Real quick, 10 seconds. Any last thoughts you'd like to see happen this year, Stephen?
What's the how many games is Michigan going to win next year? The football team. We're both Michigan alums and fans. So.
Oh, we're back to the BCS again.
All right.
And actually, it was great. Michigan State. We're both doing good. Let's keep going.
I was just going to say for the Spartan fans here. Now wait a minute.
Wayne State making the bowl games. Let's not.
Next year.
Last question. Noah.
Yes. Well, we had the state's largest film studio say it's going to default on its loan. Any hope for the film incentives? Are we going to see any sort of increase in that funding?
Well, we have $25 million there today, and if you look at the choices, that's a good number for where they're at because we have many more pressing needs like education, higher education, pure Michigan, and ultimately the question of returning dollars to our taxpayers.
And when is the budget announcement coming up?
February 9th, and I will be doing the presentation with the Lieutenant Governor and Budget Director Nixon, and I'm looking forward to it.
So people will be able to see more specifics in terms of school funding. I know there are a lot of parents out there that are waiting and watching.
Yeah, because I didn't want to piecemeal this. If you think about any time you spend money, if you don't keep track of your money or your checkbook register, you get in trouble, don't you? So my model was, instead of giving you the little bits and bytes, let's put the big picture out there, the whole picture, and give it to you in one shot in terms of a good recommendation.
And Governor, crime in March, you're going to deal with the crime?
A public safety message, because we have 4 of the top 10 cities for violent crime, and that's unacceptable, and that's going to be a March message. Right now, we're around March 7th.
You're going to come right back here and talk to these folks about that, right?
We can do this again. We can do this monthly if you'd like to.
Good marketing.
Good marketing. All right. Thank you so much again, Governor Snyder, for coming here. And thank you so much for watching. You can always continue the conversation on MiVote.org. For everyone at Detroit Public Television, I'm Christy McDonald. Have a great night.